Blackbeard's hidden treasure, the legend of Blackbeard, had always been steeped in fire and blood. But what most feared was not his violence. It was what he left behind. When he was finally brought down in 1718, his severed head was displayed as a warning, yet the stories did not die with him. Instead, they multiplied. Sailors whispered that Blackbeard had hidden a vast fortune, a treasure so immense it could buy kingdoms. But no chest of gold was ever found. What was uncovered, however, was far worse. It began with a map. In 1820, nearly a century after Blackbeard's death, a fisherman on the shores of Ocracoke Island discovered a strange bundle washed up with the tide. Wrapped in oilskin and tied with a cord blackened from age, it contained a brittle piece of parchment. At first glance, it looked like a sailor's chart, stained with salt and time. But there was something odd about it. Instead of ports and trade routes, the map was covered in strange symbols. Marks resembling bones, flames, and serpents, drawn along a jagged coastline. At the bottom, in ink as dark as dried blood, was a single phrase: "The devil keeps what is his." Word of the discovery spread like fire through the taverns and harbors. Some dismissed it as a forgery, but others swore it was genuine, a remnant of Blackbeard's own hand. Those who saw it said the parchment felt wrong to the touch, damp and clammy, though it was kept in the driest of rooms. And the symbols seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of one's eye, as if the map itself were alive. The fisherman who found it never lived to spend whatever gold it promised. Within days, he was dead. His body discovered at low tide, tangled in seaweed, eyes wide, mouth stuffed with black sand. His wife swore she heard him screaming the night before, though no one else in the village stirred. The map vanished soon after, taken by men who claimed to be collectors, though their faces were not remembered, as if memory itself recoiled from them. From that moment on, the map was cursed. Every few decades, it surfaced again. In Havana, in Charleston, in Nassau, passed from hand to hand, always with the promise of treasure, always followed by ruin. Captains who sought it disappeared into storms that came from clear skies. Crews turned on one another, driven mad by paranoia. Survivors, if there were any, spoke of hearing whispers on the wind, voices calling from beneath the waves, promising gold if only they would follow. But those who followed were never seen again. By the late 19th century, the map had acquired a name among sailors: the Map of the Damned. They said it was never meant to be found, that Blackbeard himself had bound it with a curse to protect his hoard. Others believed it was not a map at all, but a lure, bait for the greedy, dragging them towards something far older and darker than pirate gold. Yet still, men chased it. Gold blinds even the sanest mind, and the idea of Blackbeard's hidden fortune was too tempting to ignore. The map became an obsession for treasure hunters, smugglers, and scholars alike. It was no longer about wealth, it was about proving the legend real. But the sea does not give up its secrets freely, and every man who tried left bones on the shore. By the dawn of the 20th century, the map was thought lost once more, buried under time and superstition. But in a small seaside museum in North Carolina, a locked drawer held something wrapped in oilskin, blackened by age, humming faintly with the scent of brine. The curator, too afraid to display it, kept it hidden from the public. He never admitted what it was, but the staff whispered about the strange noises that came from his office at night. The sound of waves crashing, though the sea was miles away. What none of them knew was that the map was only the beginning. The true terror lay not in its symbols or its curse, but in what it pointed toward. Because Blackbeard's hidden treasure was never just gold. It was something far worse, something buried in the earth and sea for good reason. And every time the map returned, it brought the world one step closer to waking it. The map had lain dormant in the curator's drawer for years, yet the silence surrounding it was never complete. The night watchmen swore they sometimes heard dripping water, though the floors were dry. Visitors complained of headaches when standing too close to the locked case that held the key to the drawer. Some claimed they smelled smoke, faint and acrid, as if the parchment still carried the breath of Blackbeard's burning beard. But the real danger began when the map was once again revealed to the sea. In 1912, a hurricane tore through the Carolina coast, flooding the museum and scattering its contents. Days later, the ruined building was cleared, but the drawer where the map had been stored was found empty. Whether stolen or swept away, no one could say. The curator himself was gone. His body never recovered, though witnesses remembered seeing him standing knee-deep in floodwater during the storm, staring blankly at the horizon. Some swore they heard him laughing as the winds howled, as though greeting something that had finally arrived. The map was next seen in the hands of a whaling ship's captain out of Boston. He claimed it had been given to him by a man with eyes so dark they reflected no light. The crew was skeptical at first, until strange things began to happen at sea. The water around their vessel often grew unnaturally still, no wind, no waves, as though the ocean were holding its breath. On those nights, voices rose from below the surface. They weren't the groans of whales or the creaks of the hull. These were whispers, human whispers, hundreds of them, layered and indistinct. The crew leaned over the rails to listen, but what they heard drove them pale and silent. Each man later admitted he had heard his own name called from beneath the waves. The ship never returned to Boston. Months later, pieces of its hull washed ashore in Bermuda. The wood bore marks not of rot or storm, but of teeth. Enormous teeth, wide as a man's hand. The captain's log was found floating among the wreckage, its last entry nearly illegible, ink smeared by water and shaking hands. What little could be read spoke of the treasure not being gold. The sea keeps its bargains, and the voices will not stop. The map disappeared again, as it always did, slipping through blood and ruin into new hands. By the 1930s, it had become something of a forbidden legend among collectors, whispered about in private circles. Many dismissed it as sailors' nonsense, but a few, those desperate enough to gamble their fortunes and sanity, sought it still. They said if you traced the map's lines beneath moonlight, the ink glowed faintly, outlining not only coasts but hidden caverns and reefs that no chart had ever marked. Caverns whispered to be burial grounds, places where the ocean had claimed more than ships. By the Second World War, rumors spread among Navy men patrolling the Atlantic that U-boats had encountered something strange near the Outer Banks. Survivors of torpedoed ships told of lights beneath the water, green, shifting, moving against the current. Some claimed entire vessels were dragged down, not by explosives, but by something alive, rising from the depths. And among the German sailors captured, a handful carried crude sketches, symbols copied from the map of the damned, marks that matched those cursed flames and serpents scrawled centuries before. It was as if the map itself was spreading, duplicating through memory, imprinting its warnings on anyone who gazed too long. But the most chilling account came decades later, in 1965. A group of treasure divers near Ocracoke stumbled upon a cave entrance revealed only at the lowest tide. Inside, etched into the stone, they found carvings. Pirate symbols, yes, but alongside them, shapes no sailor had reason to know. Spirals that seemed to twist into infinity. Eyes that stared back even when covered with sand. At the rear of the cavern lay a half-buried chest, swollen with salt and time. The men pulled it free, eager for gold. When they pried it open, the air around them turned cold. Inside were not coins or jewels, but bones. Dozens of skulls, cracked and blackened, their mouths stuffed with wet sand. And among them, wrapped in rotting cloth, lay the map. The divers fled, abandoning the chest, but only 2 of the 6 surfaced alive. They swam as though chased, coughing seawater and blood. When questioned, both spoke the same words again and again, their eyes glassy with terror. The whispers follow. The whispers follow. One of them took his own life days later. The other vanished without a trace, leaving his house locked from within, his bed unmade, a trail of seawater across the floor leading to the open window. The map had returned, and with it the whispers. Each time it resurfaced, the voices grew louder, the death stranger, the sea hungrier. Blackbeard's hidden treasure was pulling closer, and those who sought it never realized they weren't hunters at all. They were prey. By the late 20th century, the legend of Blackbeard's map had grown so entangled with death that most dismissed it as folklore. A tale to scare divers and keep children from wandering too close to the sea. Yet beneath the laughter and skepticism, the whispers persisted. Ocracoke Island's fishermen told of strange tides that pulled against the moon, of nets hauled up heavy with bones instead of fish, and they spoke most fearfully of Dead Man's Cove. It was a jagged stretch of shoreline where waves crashed endlessly against black rock, a place where compasses spun uselessly, and gulls circled but never landed. Locals avoided it. They said the water there was wrong, too dark, too still at times, then violent in an instant, as though something beneath the surface was breathing. Many claimed Blackbeard had been sighted in that very cove after his death, his headless body waiting from the surf with lanterns swinging from its shoulders, searching for those who dared trespass. The stories might have remained only whispers, if not for the arrival of Marcus Hale in the summer of 1983. Marcus was not a fisherman or a sailor but a historian, a man who lived for dusty archives and the thrill of rediscovering forgotten truths. He had heard the legend of Blackbeard's treasure since childhood, but unlike most, he didn't scoff. He believed. When word reached him that the map of the damned had surfaced once more, changing hands in a shadowy sail in Charleston, Marcus knew he had to find it. Not for gold, he told himself, but for history, for proof that the Pirate King's final secret was real. It took him 2 years, endless favors, and money he did not have, but eventually the map found its way into his possession. He knew instantly it was genuine, for when he touched the parchment, his fingertips burned with a cold that went bone deep. The symbols seemed alive, their ink slick and wet as though freshly drawn, though the parchment itself was brittle with age. And at the center of its twisting lines was Dead Man's Cove, marked with a serpent's coil. Marcus assembled a small team of divers, men eager for profit though wary of the map's reputation. Together, they sailed to Ocracoke under a sky heavy with clouds. Locals warned them against the journey, muttering about the curse, but Marcus brushed it aside. He was a man of reason, of research. The sea held dangers, yes, but curses were for children. Or so he thought. The first night anchored off Dead Man's Cove, the crew heard voices. At first, it seemed like the wind, low, moaning tones that rose and fell with the tide. But then the voices sharpened, speaking words in no language they knew, layered and countless, as if the ocean itself had learned to whisper. One of the men swore he heard his dead mother calling his name. Another claimed he saw figures standing on the cliffs above, though when lights were cast, nothing was there. Still, Marcus pressed on. At dawn, the divers entered the water. Beneath the surface, the cove revealed its secrets. An underwater cave mouth yawning black, its edges carved with symbols identical to those on the map. Against all instincts, they swam inside. The cave was deeper than expected, winding like the guts of some enormous beast. Strange currents tugged them down narrow passages, pushing them toward chambers filled with wreckage. Splintered wood, rusted cannons, and bones upon bones. Entire skeletons floated half-buried in the sand, jaws agape, their skulls turned toward the divers as if watching. Then they found the chest. It lay wedged in the rocks, half-buried, iron bindings rusted but intact. Marcus' heart pounded as they pried it free, dragging it upward. But the moment they touched it, the sea seemed to change. The water grew warm, bubbling, as though something vast had stirred. The whispers rose to screams, echoing not in their ears but inside their skulls. One diver panicked, tearing off his mask, his mouth opening in a silent shriek as he drowned before their eyes. Another bolted for the surface, never seen again. Marcus and the 2 remaining divers clutched the chest, hauling it into their boat. The storm struck almost instantly. Waves rose higher than the mast, lightning split the sky, and wind howled with the force of 1,000 voices. The sea wanted the chest back. Somehow, they survived the night, washing ashore miles from Ocracoke with the chest still intact. But their relief curdled when they pried it open. Inside, they found no gold, no jewels. Only a mound of sand, black and wet, shifting as though alive. And beneath the sand, more bones, their sockets staring upward. Marcus reached inside, pulling free a skull with a crack down the crown. As he lifted it, the sand began to pour from its mouth like blood, spreading across the deck in thick streams. The two divers screamed, demanding he throw it back, but Marcus could not. His hands would not obey. The skull's empty sockets seemed fixed on him, and in its hollow silence, he heard a voice. Not from the sea this time, but from within his own mind. A voice promising him the truth, promising him the treasure that Blackbeard had truly guarded. That night, both divers vanished. Their bunks lay empty, their belongings untouched, and wet footprints led from the boat's deck into the black water. Marcus never saw them again. When he finally returned to shore, alone, the chest was gone. Some said he threw it into the sea. Others claimed the sea took it back. But Marcus lived only a few weeks more, muttering to anyone who would listen about the curse of Dead Man's Cove. He said Blackbeard's treasure was not gold. It was a bargain, a binding between man and the abyss. And every time the chest was found, the sea rose to reclaim what was its own. Marcus Hale's death should have been the end of the tale. His journals, filled with frantic scrawlings and salt-stained pages, were dismissed as the ramblings of a man driven mad by obsession. The locals shook their heads, muttered that the curse had claimed yet another fool, and returned to their lives. But some stories refuse to stay buried, especially when there are men still willing to pay the price for greed. In 2006, a group of treasure hunters led by a man named Daniel Cross stumbled upon Marcus journals in an estate sale. Cross was no scholar. He was a mercenary, a man who had made his living stripping wrecks of whatever could be sold: copper, silver, artifacts smuggled to black market collectors. To him, Marcus' words were not a warning. They were a roadmap, proof that the legend of Blackbeard's treasure was more than drunken tales. Cross read of Dead Man's Cove, of the cave mouth carved with symbols of the chest and the skull. He ignored the madness, the vanishings, the curse. He saw only opportunity. Within weeks, he assembled a crew: divers, mercenaries, even a documentary filmmaker eager to capture the discovery for fame. They brought equipment Marcus could only have dreamed of: submersibles, sonar, lights powerful enough to turn the ocean blackness into a false daylight. They arrived at Ocracoke under a bright summer sky, but even then, the locals refused to go near them. The fishermen shook their heads and said the cove would eat them alive. Cross laughed. On the second night, the laughter ended. The crew heard it first, the voices Marcus had described. They came not with the tide but from within the steel of the ship itself, vibrating through the hull like a heartbeat. The filmmaker recorded it, and when he played it back, the whispers twisted into something worse. A scream, long and drawn out, as if something buried deep below had been waiting centuries to be heard. Still, Cross pushed them forward. The divers entered the water and found the cave exactly as Marcus had described. The serpent's coil etched into the stone, glowing faintly with algae that pulsed like veins. Inside, the wreckage had grown. More bones, more splintered timbers, more echoes of death. And there, at the bottom of the passage, they found it again. The chest. This time, when they touched it, the cave seemed to awaken. The water turned thick, heavy, and currents surged with the strength of claws dragging them deeper. Several of the divers panicked, but Cross was relentless. He ordered the chest hauled into the submersible, and they broke the surface as thunder split the sky. It was then that the true curse began. The chest sat on the deck, dripping, silent. No one dared open it, not after reading Marcus' warnings. But at night, it moved. The crew would awake to find it shifted across the deck, its iron bindings rattling as though something inside were clawing to be free. One morning, a diver was found sprawled beside it. His body bloated and wet though he had never touched the water. Sand poured from his mouth, his nostrils, even his eyes. Cross grew more determined. He ranted that the chest contained the greatest treasure the world had ever known, that Blackbeard himself had bargained with the abyss for its power. He ordered it opened. The men obeyed reluctantly, The lid creaked, iron screaming against iron, and inside, once again, there was no gold. Only sand, black and wet, alive with movement. It writhed like maggots, spilling upward, crawling over the edges. From beneath the sand rose bones, hundreds of them, skulls grinning as they surfaced. And then came the smell, thick and choking, of rot and brine, as though the sea had vomited up centuries of death. The filmmaker dropped his camera, scrambling back, but the others were frozen. The sand began to pour across the deck, forming shapes, bodies half-formed, mouths opening in silent screams. The crew turned on each other, driven mad by terror. Some leapt into the sea, swallowed instantly by waves that surged unnaturally high. Others clawed at their own skin as if something beneath it wanted out. Through it all, Cross stood transfixed. He swore he saw a figure rise from the chest itself. Not a skeleton, not a man, but something in between. A towering shadow crowned with writhing tendrils, its body made of shifting sand and bone, its eyes burning like coals in the night. And though it had no mouth, he heard it speak. Not in words, but in the crash of waves and the thunder above, a sound that told him the treasure was never meant for mortals. The storm tore their ship apart. When rescue boats arrived days later, there was no sign of the crew. Only fragments of the vessel floated on the water, scorched as if by fire, though no lightning had been seen. The only thing recovered was the filmmaker's camera, wedged in the rocks of Dead Man's Cove. The footage, blurred and salt-damaged, showed only glimpses. The chest opening, the black sand rising, the screams. And in the final seconds before the recording cut off, a single image. A skull half buried in sand, its sockets filled with fire. The footage never aired. The camera was seized, the survivors silenced. But the story spread anyway, carried by whispers, by fear. And with each retelling, one truth became clear. Blackbeard's hidden treasure was not gold, not jewels, not wealth at all. It was a debt, a pact with the sea itself. And every time men sought it, the price was blood. The ocean keeps its secrets, but only for so long. For centuries, the map of the damned surfaced and vanished, dragging with it men who craved more than their lives could hold. But the sea is patient. It waits. It whispers. And always it calls. After the disappearance of Daniel Cross and his crew, the story should have ended. The cursed chest should have been forgotten, allowed to sink again into the black silence of the abyss. But greed never sleeps. It passes from one generation to the next like a sickness, disguised as ambition. In 2021, a salvage company named Abyssal Ventures launched an expedition under the guise of studying wrecks near Ocracoke. They carried with them technology more advanced than anything Cross could have imagined. Drones, submersibles, sonar capable of piercing the darkest trenches. Their investors were not fishermen or dreamers. They were men in suits, hungry for returns, whispering about artifacts, relics, untapped riches. The lead diver, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Marrow, knew the legends. She had studied them at university, dismissed them as folklore, until the investors placed Marcus Hale's journals in her hands. The pages still smelled faintly of brine, still bore the stains of salt and something darker. She should have refused. She should have walked away. But curiosity is its own kind of greed. The expedition began with clear skies, calm waters. Cameras rolled, investors smiled. The drones slipped into the depths, tracing the jagged coastline, until they found it again. Dead Man's Cove. Even through the feed, the place radiated dread. The cave mouth loomed like a wound in the earth, carved with the serpent's coil that glowed faintly in the darkness. Evelyn ordered the drones inside. The screens flickered as the feed crackled with static, though no interference should have existed. And there it was, the chest. Waiting. Always waiting. The investors demanded it be retrieved. Evelyn hesitated, her instincts screaming against it, but she obeyed. The submersible's arms reached forward, clamping onto the chest's rusted bindings, dragging it into the light. As it broke the surface, the sea around them surged. though no storm clouds darkened the sky. The crew lifted it onto the deck. Cameras rolled. Investors cheered. But Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the water. For a moment, she swore she saw faces beneath the surface. Pale, hollow-eyed, mouths opening in silent screams before vanishing in the ripples. That night, the whispers began. They came first through the ship's intercom, though no one had touched it. Low, guttural voices, speaking in languages no one understood, layered atop one another like waves crashing endlessly. Then they came from the walls, the steel vibrating as though the ship itself had learned to breathe. Crew members began to vanish, slipping into the dark corridors, never returning. Others swore they saw shadows standing in their cabins, dripping seawater, staring with burning eyes. The chest moved on its own. Cameras caught it shifting across the deck at night, scraping against the steel, leaving behind trails of black sand that hissed when touched. One morning, the lid was ajar. No one admitted to opening it. Inside, the sand writhed like a living thing, rising and falling as though it were breathing. And then came the bones. Skulls surfaced in the black grains, eye sockets glowing faintly, jaws twitching as if trying to speak. The crew panicked. Investors screamed through the satellite feed for Evelyn to secure it, to bring it back no matter the cost. But Evelyn realized then what Marcus Hale had learned, what Daniel Cross had ignored. The chest was not a treasure. It was a prison. Something had been bound inside, sealed by Blackbeard himself in his final act of defiance against the abyss. Gold could be buried. Jewels could be hidden. But this was not meant to be touched. It was meant to be buried forever. But it was too late. The sand poured from the chest, spreading across the deck, swallowing boots, hands, faces. The crew screamed as it pulled them under, smothering them in silence. The ship's lights flickered, drowned in darkness, and through it all Evelyn saw a shape rising. Not a man, not a skeleton, but a figure woven from sand and bone, crowned in writhing tendrils. His eyes burned like coals, and though it had no mouth, she heard it speak. It was not words. It was the sea itself, roaring in her skull. It was hunger endless and eternal, and it told her the truth. Blackbeard had never been guarding his gold. He had been guarding the world from what the sea demanded in exchange for his power. The hidden treasure was not wealth but debt, packed with the abyss, prison carved in iron and salt, and every hand that touched it loosened the chains. Evelyn did not scream. She only watched as the chest split open fully, as the thing inside emerged, towering against the night sky, blotting out the stars. The sea rose to meet it, waves devouring the ship whole. Cameras caught only fragments, the sand, the skulls, the endless dark, before the feed went dead. Days later, pieces of the vessel washed ashore. No bodies were found. Only fragments of journals, a single phrase scrawled in Evelyn's final entry. The ink smeared with salt. Some treasures should never be found. And still, in taverns and ports, the whispers return. The map surfaces again, folded in oilskin, blackened by brine. Men unfold it with trembling hands, chasing the promise of gold, never realizing that every step closer brings them nearer to the debt the sea is still waiting to collect. Because Blackbeard's hidden treasure was never his to give. It belongs to the abyss. And one day, when greed pushes too far, it will rise again. Not for one crew, not for one ship, but for us all.